What is up, guys? Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, hi, my name's Erin. I am a registered dietitian and I help my clients break the cycle of dieting by teaching them to nourish your bodies well. And today I'm going to teach you how to properly calculate your calorie needs as well as calculate a either surplus or a deficit, depending on whether or not you are trying to gain or lose weight. And then I'll also teach you how to appropriately calculate your macros. So this video is for anyone who just wants to know how to do those things and wants that information for themselves. It also may be helpful for students if you are in a health or fitness field, or even personal trainers. If you have clients coming to you with these types of questions, sometimes it's really helpful just to have someone like show you how to break it down. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me get my screen up here so we can get rolling. So I've got a couple of different things to show you guys today. So first things first, we're going to figure out how much we need to eat. So first thing I want to say is that everybody's calorie needs are going to be different. I am not an advocate at all, nor does research support giving kind of baseline plans such as, 1,200, 1,600, 1,800 calories for people. It really is going to serve your patients, your clients best if you calculate it individually. The way I calculate calories is an equation called the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation. That is going to calculate what we call your resting energy expenditure. Some things call this your BMR as well. So you can use this equation. This is the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation. This is the most widely used. It is also the most validated in research for ambulatory adults. So obviously, if people are in a hospital setting, this is going to look a little different. But for ambulatory active adults without any other kind of major health conditions that would change their calorie needs, this is what we tend to go with. There are calculators online, and I will give me just a second, switch over. So this is the one that I tend to use. Oops, share it. Oops, hold on, let me. Sorry, guys, hold on one second. There we go. Okay. Okay, there we go. So there are simple ways you can do that equation that I just showed you on the past slide. Another probably simpler way to do it is to just find an online calculator such as this one. This is the website I use, but there certainly are others that you can use. So I have in here my metrics. So I have my age, my height, my gender, and my weight. Again, all of these are going to be different for everybody, right? So that's kind of why it is super important to do individualized calculation. So we just hit calculate. And then as you can see, this is going to give us our BMR. So that is the BMR and resting energy expenditure, or REE. Those are the same thing. So what that number is that is the number of calories it takes to keep your body alive. So it doesn't account for any activity. It just accounts for basic bodily functions. So those are going to be things like keeping your heart beating, keeping your lungs breathing, keeping your digestive tract working, your brain functioning to kind of keep those organ systems in check, but really doesn't account for any musculature or any movement. That is what this activity level, which is down here, and it was also on the last slide as well, accounts for. So I do like that this calculator, it does give you kind of just some options, and you can kind of pick and choose based on your activity level. Another way to do this, and I'm going to switch back over. Sorry for all of the movement. Let's see here. So back over here, you can just take your REE or your BMR and multiply it by either 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, so on and so forth. And that is basically going to give you the numbers that you saw on the other screen. So what that is that is your total energy expenditure, or TEE. And that is going to be your maintenance calories. So this is where people get really confused. So your maintenance calories are the number of calories that your body needs, not only to sustain your life, but also to keep you at your current weight, given your typical exercise routine. So to that end, if you wanted to just maintain your calories, you would stop right there, right? So, for me, we'll go ahead and pull the BMR calculator up again. So for me, let's see, my BMR is 1642. So that's a number I never, ever want to eat below, right? But then if, let's say I exercise, between 4 and 5 times per week. So for me to maintain my current weight, that would be about 2,400 calories per day. Now, let's say we want to change our body composition, right? So let's say we would prefer to lose weight, right? So if that's what you're aiming for, we want to still calculate your total energy expenditure, or your TEE. So you calculate your BMR, you multiply it by your activity factor, and then you subtract. So if for me to maintain my weight is 2,400 calories, if I wanted to lose weight, I would subtract anywhere from 200 to 400. So that's going to be, 200 to 500. So that's going to be anywhere from 1,900 calories per day to 2,200 calories per day. Okay. And that's going to be what's called a deficit. So the deficit is where you take your total energy expenditure, or your maintenance calories, and you subtract from it. I don't tend to go much below 500 calories below that maintenance level as a deficit. So you really don't want a huge deficit. Now, there are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is that, one, it's just uncomfortable, right? We don't want to underfeed people. We don't want people following super low calorie diets. It's not going to feel good. They're going to be really hungry. They're probably going to be really tired if they're working out. Even if they're not working out, if you're not getting enough food in your day, you're going to be hungry. So we don't want people being uncomfortable. It's also, in some cases, a really big shift. So for people, like, let's say I was used to eating 3,000 calories a day. Well, going all the way down to 2,000 calories a day isn't going to feel good. So we don't want to put people through extremes. And the other reason is, to be perfectly honest, that moderate deficit. So that deficit of kind of somewhere in the range of like 200 to 500 calories, that really seems to be ideal for fat loss. So we have lots of research that backs that up. I will say that it is slow. Okay. So a lot of times people tend to think that the more extreme our deficit. So, let's say, okay, well, if a 200 calorie deficit will help me lose weight, well, then a 700 calorie deficit should help me lose weight faster. And unfortunately, that is not the case. We really just don't see that in the data. The other thing that does is that even if you do lose weight quickly, we tend to see that you are losing both muscle and fat. So this is where I want to talk a little bit about body composition. Sorry, I keep knocking my mic over here. Let's pull it more in front of my face. So for body composition, or for weight loss specifically, people generally say they want to lose weight because they are measuring their success on a scale. I'm not a fan of using the scale as a measure of success. I will get into that in a different talk, but for the purposes of today, what we have to measure most often is the scale. So to measure it, you see the number on the scale going down, you assume you're doing things right. But the reality is, not all weight is created equal. So your body is made up of different parts. So we have our muscle mass, which is, the muscles around our bones. We also have our bones and our internal organs. And then we also have our fat mass, which is, kind of the extra padding. Now, we all need a certain amount of fat on our bodies, right? Like, the goal is never to go to 0% fat. But when we say we want to lose weight, what we really want to lose is the excess fat. Right. And to do that, unfortunately, that process is slow. Your body can only burn about 1 to 2 pounds of fat per week. So that 200 to 500 calorie deficit is really puts you in that sweet spot for kind of targeting that fat loss. It will be slow, 1 to 2 pounds a week. That is normal, but that is the only way to guarantee that what you are losing is fat and fat only. If you are losing weight faster than that, you are not necessarily losing fat mass. What you are losing is a lot of water and probably a good bit of muscle as well, if you are losing more than 1 to 2 pounds per week. Okay. So that's why I recommend that modest calorie deficit, because it really targets that fat loss for one, and it's just more sustainable, more realistic for most people. It's also going to keep you fueled and healthy. It's going to make sure you get all of the stuff that you need throughout the day. Okay. So we talked about maintenance. We talked about deficits. And of course, if you're trying to gain weight, or particularly gain muscle is what usually most people are trying to gain, we calculate our maintenance and then we just go the other direction, right? So we would just increase by, honestly, probably not more than 2 to 500 calories. So again, same range for the same reasons, right? So, if you're used to eating 2,000 calories per day, going up to 2,500 is going to be a bit of a stretch. You may eventually scale up to something closer to 3,000, but as an intermediate step, I would start at 2,200, 2,500, something along those lines, to where you're making kind of realistic steps. If you are just kind of throwing calories at your body, it's not going to feel good. It's not going to feel good. You're going to be really full. You may not, digestive system is going to be uncomfortable. And honestly, if your digestive system isn't used to handling that many nutrients or that many calories, you may not be able to actually absorb all of them. So again, we want to scale up. With both of these, whether it is a surplus or a deficit, you can periodically scale up or scale down. So like I just said, with a surplus, if you wanted to start at 2,200 calories, let's say you're at 2,000 calories, your goal eventually is to get to 3,000 calories. Well, let's start with 2,200 for the first week, maybe 2 weeks. And then we bump up again. Maybe we go to 2,400. And then maybe for another couple of weeks. And then maybe we reweigh you and recalculate and see if you actually are ready to go kind of, 26, 28 or 3,000 calories. Same goes with a deficit, right? You may start, let's say you're starting at 2,000 calories. We bump you down to 1,800. And we let you do that for a couple of weeks, see how you do. And then we may bump you down again. If we reevaluate and you've lost weight and your calorie needs have actually changed, then we may bump you down even lower. So again, all of this is very fluid. So don't feel that just because you calculated, 1,800 calories or whatever as your calorie needs, those are going to change as your weight changes, as your age changes, as your your height probably isn't going to change a whole lot, but your weight and your age will. So always, lots of calculators out there, lots of ways to recalculate it. So that is how you calculate your calorie needs. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is how to calculate your macro needs. So your macros, if you're unfamiliar, are your protein, carbohydrates, and fat. What those are 3 nutrients that provide calories, right? So all of the calories we eat in a day come from either protein, carbohydrates, or fat. Now, most foods have a combination, right? There are some foods, for example, meat is pretty much pure protein, but it does have some fat, starches. So things like, potatoes and breads and pastas and stuff like that are fairly purely carbs, but they do have some fat and some protein in there as well. So most foods are actually going to have a combination of them, which I think confuses people sometimes. They're like, well, where does this go? But if you are tracking using a calorie tracker such as MyFitnessPal or Lose It, most of those things are advanced enough to account for the fact that, 3-ounce portion of chicken is going to have, 20 grams of protein and maybe 1 gram of fat or something like that. If you are not using a calorie tracker, we kind of just go with grouping it with whatever it has the most of. So in terms of, a meat, we would generally call it a protein. And then in terms of like, breads and starches and things like that, we would generally call those carbs. Anyway, what a lot of people ask me is like, okay, well, what should my macro breakdown be? So in a way, people think that it matters more than it does. And in other ways, people don't realize how much it does matter. So when we are calculating our calorie needs, not all calories are created equal. You do, to an extent, need calories from all three groups. So you need protein, you need carbohydrates, and you need fat. Of those three, I would say that the protein is probably the one to pay the most attention to. That's not because protein is necessarily more important, but your body has a harder time making it. So what that means is that your body really needs all the protein your body needs. It pretty well has to get from your diet. It can, in some cases, convert it from carbs and other sources, but it's hard. So it's not, your body's not really designed to do that. You really do need to get your protein in your diet. Also, of course, if you are someone who is trying to build muscle, your protein needs might be a little bit higher. So that might be a reason to eat a little bit more protein. Between carbohydrates and fat, your body actually can convert those two into each other. So by that, I mean, it can convert the fat that you eat into carbs, and it can also convert the carbs you eat into fat. And it will do that rather seamlessly without you ever knowing. Based on what it needs. So if it has carbs and it needs fat, it will convert. If it needs fat and has carbs, it will convert. So between those two matter a little bit less. That said, there are kind of some general guidelines in terms of the breakdown that can be helpful. So the breakdown I like to use, and I'll pull up another screen here for you. So the breakdown I like to use is carbohydrates. I like for carbohydrates to be between 40 to 60%. Whether it is closer to 40 or whether it is closer to 60, a lot of times for me personally depends on the activity level of the person I'm calculating for. So athletes or anybody who is at the gym multiple days per week, I usually actually go 50% and above. If it is someone who is either having a really hard time losing weight, or I know that they have a higher protein need for whatever reason, I might, or sometimes, if they have a condition such as diabetes or something like that, where they need to be monitoring their carbohydrate intake, then I might do something closer to 40%. Protein, generally speaking, and this is probably where I get the most contention, is protein really does not need to be higher than 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, or as you can see there in percentages, about 15 to 20% of your total calories. So what that means, and again, I want to be very, very clear, that is 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. A lot of trainers that I see will recommend anywhere from 1 to 2 grams per pound of body weight. And that is really, really high. And frankly, for most people, probably way too much. So if you're not familiar, 1 kilogram of body weight is equal to 2.2 pounds. So what that means is you basically divide your body weight by 2.2. So for example, I'm just gonna use myself as an example. So I weigh about 200 pounds. I know the math, but you can check it. That's 90.9 kilograms. So I need anywhere from, and now is when I need my calculator. I'm going to pull it up here. So we would go 0.8 times 90.9 kilograms, and that's going to equal 72.72 grams of protein. That's my low end. And then if I wanted to go higher, it would be 1.2 times, what did I say, 90.9. So that's going to be, so my range for protein is going to be anywhere from roughly 70 to 110 grams. Now, I sometimes it's just easier to just do it at one. That's usually what I do for folks that are pretty active. But lots and lots of research has shown that between, this protein metric and higher protein metrics, there's really not a difference in fat loss. And there's really not a difference in muscle growth. The key with muscle growth a lot of times comes down to timing. So people may be okay about getting their protein needs in. And I want to be clear. I mean, I know my protein goal is about 100 grams of protein per day, but that's honestly sometimes hard for me to hit. Because that's, three solid, 3 to 4 ounce portions of meat per day, plus probably some protein snacks and maybe even a supplement as well. So that it is a lot of protein. But that said, I personally lift a lot of weight, so I want to maintain my muscle mass. But that said, what a lot of people will do is they will go large periods of time without eating protein, and then they will try to eat it all at once. And that really, you are doing yourself a disservice. So your body can really only absorb about 20 to maybe 30 grams of protein at one time. So, that's going to be something along the lines of certainly, most standard protein shakes have about 20 grams of protein per serving. And, a 3 to 4 ounce piece of lean meat is also going to have somewhere in like the 25 to 30 grams of protein range. So those are kind of what we're calling a serving size. So a lot of times people will eat more than that in one sitting, which is okay to do. You're not doing any harm. That said, your body's likely not absorbing all of that protein as protein. It may not be absorbing it at all, or if it is, it likely is converting it to fat before it's going to utilize it as protein. So, the overall protein may be lower than some of the other estimates you've heard, but also the timing is important of doing it in those 20 to 30 gram chunks over time. And that's kind of where you do have to somewhat, eat consistently throughout the day. And then our last macronutrient, of course, is fat. Anywhere from 20 to 30% of your total calories is going to come from fat. Now, you saw that I had on there that, various, our various macronutrients contained various numbers of calories. So what that means is, what I just gave you were our calories in percentages. So that will tell you what percentage of your calories needs to come from protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Now, for protein, I gave you 2 ways to do it, right? So for the protein, I gave you could either do about 15 to 20% of your total calories, or you can do that method I talked about a little bit more, which is anywhere from 0.8 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So in order to do that, you would just convert your body weight to kilograms and then multiply that by any number between 0.8 to 1.2. How, on the higher end is if you're trying to maintain more muscle, or certainly if you're trying to build more muscle. On the lower end is if, you're not trying to do those things. I will say, if you're trying to maintain your weight, 0.8 to 1 is a really good place to stay. If you were trying to lose weight, specifically fat, or if you're trying to gain muscle, then anywhere from 1 to 1.2 is probably a good place for you. There are various disease states where you would want to go higher or lower, but that's something to talk to your dietitian about specifically. So that's kind of how we do your protein. And that will give you the grams that you need for a day. But you will notice for your carbohydrates and for your fat, I gave you percentages. So I gave you anywhere from 40 to 60% of your total calories should be coming from carbs. And then I told you anywhere from 20 to 30% of your total calories should be coming from fat. So how we get that into grams is that's where kind of we have to do a little bit of conversion. So let me share my screen one last time. Bear with me. So I've got my calculator up here for you all. So I am just going to use my personal calculations as an example, just to throw some numbers in here. So I'm going to start with my current calorie goal is about 2,400 calories per day. Now, whatever you calculate, so kind of back a couple of minutes using that BMR and that activity factor, and then adding for a surplus or subtracting for a deficit, whatever you find out is kind of like, this is my calorie goal. That's what you plug in first. Sorry, I just hit my microphone there. So for me, that number is 2,400. Now I'm going to start, we already did protein. So my protein is about 100 grams of protein per day, but to figure out carbs and fat. So for carbs, I usually do about 50% carbs. Again, I'm very active. And I think a lot of people forget that if you were trying to build muscle, you actually really need carbs too. Carbs are what, protein is what actually builds your muscle, builds the lattice work of those muscle fibers, but carbs are what fuels those muscles. So in order for your muscles to get bigger, you need to be able to work them. In order for them to work, you have to give them fuel. And that's where that carbs and like there's specifically glycogen stores, that's what's stored in between your muscle fibers to feed them while you are working out. So a lot of our muscle gains isn't just the muscle protein fibers, it is also increasing that carb storage as well as the water that the carb storage holds. So all of that is included in your muscle mass. So for people who work out, even if your goal is muscle gain, fat loss, and you're trying to kind of lose a little bit of weight, I still usually recommend, if you're pretty active, doing about 50% carbs. So to get for me to figure out how to do that, I can either take 2,400 and divide it by 2, right? So that's going to give us 50%, or multiply it by 0.5. So that's going to give us the same thing, right? So that gives us 1,200 calories. So what this tells me is that 1,200 calories from my day should be from carbs. Now that for most of us doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, okay, well, what do I need it in grams? So for every gram of carbohydrate contains 4 calories. So in order to figure out what this is in terms of grams, we just divide it by 4. Okay. So that we're going to say 1,200 divided by 4, and that's about 300 grams of carbohydrates per day. Now that may seem really staggeringly high. Remember, my calorie goal was pretty high, but it's not unreasonable. You guys saw my metrics. You saw how active I am. It's not outlandish. So I think a lot of people, when they do their calories this way, are really kind of shocked by how many calories they actually need to be eating. And if you are eating well below that, by all means, shoot me a message. I'm happy to kind of talk you through it or kind of where to start. But we definitely want to make sure you are eating enough. I'll talk about that again in just a second. To figure out our fat. So again, we're going to start with our 2,400 calories, or for you, whatever you started your, whatever you determined your calorie goal was. For fat, I'm going to do about 25%. So I could either divide this by 4, divide it up into quarters, or multiply it by 0.25. Same thing, right? So that's going to give us 600 calories, right? So again, this tells us that I need 600 calories per day from fat, but that's not particularly informative. We want to know how many grams. So for each gram of fat, it contains 9 calories as opposed to 4 from carbohydrates. So what we're going to do is divide that 600 by 9. And that gives us basically 67 grams of fat per day. Okay. So I've got 100 grams of protein. I've got 300 grams of carbohydrates, and I've got 67 grams of fat. Those are my macros. If you were to add all those up, it would equal about 2,400 calories. Okay. So that is how you calculate your calories and your macros. And then just kind of to be clear, sometimes people, when they do these numbers, are like, wow, I am not eating enough. Sometimes they find that, their macros are off balance, or what they're actually eating isn't lining up to it. Those are certainly things to talk to a dietitian about. I will say that if your goal is weight loss and you find that you're eating well under your calorie goal, that actually may be why you are stalled. That happens very, very often in my patients. Is like, let's say somebody's goal is 1,800 calories and they're eating below 1,200. Well, their body is basically getting the memo that they are starving. So a lot of times their body's holding on to every calorie they eat for dear life because it doesn't know when it's going to get more. So that can also be a big red flag in weight loss. If you need help kind of figuring out where you're at with it, you can certainly use any of the kind of the main tracking apps. MyFitnessPal is one, Lose It is another, Chronometer is actually a pretty nice one as well. I'll link all of those in the description. But really, most calorie tracking apps are fairly similar in terms of their capacity and their accuracy. It's just a matter of which one you like the interface of better. I don't recommend tracking your calories every day forever, but if it is something that you think is helpful to figure out where you are currently relative to what these goals that you just now calculated are, that can be a helpful tool as well. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Definitely hit that subscribe button. That'll get you all of my new content. You can also find me on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. I go under the handle of Erin M. Casey RDN, and I'll put all of that in the description as well. So yes, definitely feel free to reach out to me anywhere there. And I hope you found this information useful. Add any comments, questions, anything like that, and I will see you guys next week.